When you're studying insects, you should have like an insect board where you've pinned them to,
sure.
When you're doing
Doesn't mean we're not hands-on, Paul.
No,
Doesn't mean we're not hands-on.
What is an experiment other than being hands-on, right?
Welcome to the Homeschool Journal, a show that unpacks the joys and journeys of the classical homeschool family. Here's your host, Carrie McGraw.
So our session today with Paul Schaeffer. Paul, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Paul he was homeschooled for 5 years. Let's start out with that.
Oh,
okay?
Yeah, I was.
You were homeschooled. You remember your years with Cheryl Lowe, our founder. She taught you Latin and classical studies, if I remember correctly. And
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, if you remember correctly. You have a degree in liberal studies from Bellarmine. You have spent 9 years consulting with teachers and classical schools, but then you took on Memoria Press Online Academy. And so you are now director of Memoria Press Online Academy.
That's correct.
Yes. So this is why Paul is here today. Paul has this incredible vision of everything all the way through because of Memoria Press Online Academy, but he's really got a great handle on everything 7th through 12th grade, which is what we are going to try to tackle. Yes, you can laugh. It's really okay.
6 grades in a half an hour.
6 grades. Well, I think we're going to end up with part 2, like a two-parter here, because this is a lot to tackle. And because it's so much to tackle, you had given me a great idea to go kind of subject by subject instead of grade by grade, which is what I did previously. Now, I didn't tell you actually why you're here.
Oh.
No, I didn't. I just want to credit a mom out there that watched one of the 2 that I did with Michelle Tiefertiller on K-2 and 3-6. And she made a comment and she said, "This is great. Do it for 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I thought, that's a great idea. So moms out there, we are listening. I'm listening. And I brought Paul here to explain it all. So Paul, to get through this, and again, we're going to do an overview. Like, we just can't go really deep, but we are going to try to touch on as much as we can. To get through this today, this first one, I think we're going to do Latin, math, science, and modern studies. Okay? Now, with Latin, we've got grammar and a little bit of Greek in there. So you ready?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to start with Latin. Now, there's plenty of podcasts that we've all done on why study Latin. But in these middle school years, and if we go 7th and 8th and then 9th, you've got 3rd form, you've got 4th form, you've got Henley 2. So we're finishing out those grammar years in Latin. But what are we setting up in these years? Where are we going?
Well, first of all, I just want, for those families that are starting later, it's not too late to start Latin.
Oh,
so
amen.
if you're not, if you're in 7th grade and you're not in 3rd form, it's okay. Start in 1st form.
Start in 1st form.
But we're really setting students up to start to read Latin, right? So our intent, when I started working at Memoria Press, our messaging that I found in the catalogs, every time we published one was, you do Latin because, it's going to help your grammar and it's going to help your vocabulary and that sort of stuff. And all of that was absolutely true. But what I felt needed to be said more, and we were saying that because most of our I would say our family, right, the Memoria Press family, we're focused on those early years. But I want to say as you get older, when you get to this level of 7th through 12th grade, you need to start thinking about, well, now we get to read. And I mean, I started with Latina Christiana, which was a 1. We had 1 and 2 back then.
I did too.
and I started that in 3rd grade, and I just remember doing grammar every single year. And because in 6th grade, my mother decided to put me in private school, then I jumped back to Latina Christiana 1, even though I'd already started Henley in 5th grade, which, by the way, don't do that. And I didn't hit translation until I was like a sophomore because I kept jumping schools. Once I got out of homeschooling. And finally, when I started translating, I realized, oh, this is what this was all for. When you're finally able to read a text, you realize, oh, in translating familiar texts are helpful. Like, so we do 3rd form, then 4th form, then we do Henley 2, but we do that mostly the exercises in the back. I mean, there is translation in there, but we have so much time with these students that we think, okay, let's make sure they're really solid before we stick them straight into Caesar. Then we do a year of Caesar, a year of
Henley 3,
which is Cicero. And then we can do AP Latin or, Virgil. And so but even just picking up the Bible, like, we have a Vulgate course in the summer at MPOA, and all it is, it's 5 weeks, and all we do is do some translation. But this is all stuff that these kids should be familiar with. And all of a sudden, to read that through a different language, you go, oh my goodness, this makes so much more. I've never thought about it this way, right? Reading Augustine's Confessions that way for me in college was, I realized all of a sudden there's a beauty here that I didn't see coming all the way from third grade through, senior year or junior year when I started reading Virgil in high school. So that's what we're trying to prepare them for, is that actual reading. And so while we have a sequence built out, it's your traditional classical sequence where you're going to do Caesar, Cicero, Virgil.
And that's grades 10, 11, and 12.
That's grades 10, 11, 12. But you can modify that too.
Right.
Once the student's gotten used to translation, and we scale it that way because Caesar's easier prose, Cicero is more difficult prose, and Virgil's poetry, right? And so all of those things, it gets more difficult as it goes. But if you have a different goal in your homeschool, now that you're reading Latin, you want to read another text, go read another text, right? And talk about it with your child.
Now, going back to some of the earlier years, you can also introduce some Greek here.
You could introduce Greek.
Why would a family want to do that?
I don't know. I feel like this is a trope that's constantly repeated, but who was it? It was Chesterton or somebody said, no, it was Churchill. Winston Churchill said, everybody should learn Latin, and for the, for the good students, let them have Greek. It's like the cherry on top of the ice cream, right? Like if you're really good, you get that cherry. And really, I mean, it opens, right? If we're saying that classical education, we're sort of, we're stewing in what the Greeks and the Romans started and have handed down, then it opens up a whole nother pathway of getting to those original sources, right? Those Greek sources. And so so if you know the Greek language, you're going to get to those things in a deeper way, just like you would in Latin. Most families, the major driving factor for that is the scripture, right? I mentioned the Vulgate, right? The Bible wasn't written in Latin, right? It gives you, reading it in a different language gives you that sort of access, and the Latin was sort of core for the universal church for centuries. But, to get down to the Greek, that's the original, that's a wonderful thing to do. And when students have done Latin from third, fourth grade, second grade, learning Greek is not, it's difficult. Like learning any language is difficult, but you don't have to spend time on what is a declension, what is a conjugation, that sort of thing, because our students already know that.
Right. They move much more quickly through it. And I have an odd 16-year-old that I will say, when she turned 16, she asked for her birthday for a Greek Bible so she could sit and have fun translating. Yeah,
well, there you
right.
go.
Now, and I had to ask Mrs. Lowe, okay, what do I go get at that time? And she directed me, and she got her Greek Bible. So, actually, she just had fun with it, is my point. So like you said, that foundation was so solid. She was able to have fun with that.
Yeah, and it's one thing, I think, for a student to be, as a parent or a teacher, to direct and say, you need to learn this to that student. It's another thing to really shove it down their throats, and say, there's like, you're not getting out of this. You have to do this sort of thing. And I think when there is sort of that more openness, if we're doing this, like we know why we're doing this, we're motivated to do this, then the student does. Some students, this is not a for sure thing that's going to happen, right? But some students will take that on, and it will be something that they enjoy rather than something that is a burden.
Right.
And that's really and I see that. Like, I was teaching juniors a few years ago at Highlands, and some of them were complaining about still learning Latin, and I was like, but really, I know this is sort of a begrudging thing for you, but isn't it nice to be able to do what you do in that language? And they were like, yeah, it is. But, those students weren't going to be the ones picking up, extra to do. But some of them in the class did.
But some of them do. And you open up new interests for students through this. So just to give a nod to these years, maybe the early years, again, those 7th and 8th, we finish our formal study of English grammar in those years. And that's because we learn English best through Latin.
That's right.
And we're finishing out, that Latin grammatical stage as well.
That's right.
So,
and there's things that I don't remember hitting in English grammar class. I remember being in an 8th grade class and it really was we have to go through all the grammar, make sure everybody's good with grammar before we keep going. But I don't remember dealing much with subjunctives or anything like that. But in Latin, it's all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. And so it even learning it through Latin, you get a whole lot more in-depth grammar knowledge than what most grammar
usage
courses are going to do.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to move on to math, and I keep math and Latin together, okay? Just because to me they're two very concrete subjects.
Well, they're two cumulative subjects, right?
Yes, thank you.
You can't skip levels in math.
No, you can't skip levels in math. And so when we're in 7th grade, we're in pre-algebra. Mm-hmm. When we're in 8th grade, we're in Algebra 1. We start with video text.
That's right.
And so any commentary on that right there, like starting into the video text?
Well, maybe? For one, I would say I think it's important to understand the perspective video text is coming from. So video text, just assumes from the very beginning, just like we said, right? Math is cumulative, mm-hmm. right? But if you sit down and you look at Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 text, Algebra 1 is repeating a lot of what's done in pre-algebra. Algebra 2 is repeating a lot of what Algebra 1 did, right? Because students need repetition, right? They need that. But at the same time, a lot of those, because we're splitting this into 2, maybe 3 years in a sort of a standard text, the students need more repetition because it's not building on itself in a very incremental way. And that's what video text did explicitly, right? And so you really, it is possible sometimes to jump from one program to another, but really if you dive into video text, you need to plan on, I'm here for 2 years.
Yes.
And but it's beautifully, the way the concepts are organized is very beautifully done. And so, and I remember sitting down and looking at it for the first time and saying, all of this makes sense how it's ordered. And so, and if your student masters this concept, the next concept, when they're using that, they're using the prior concept as well. And I think that's the beauty of it.
So let's stay on your word order. We hit 10th grade and we've got Algebra 2. We hit, 9th grade Algebra 2 and then 10th grade geometry. And so what we don't do, and what a lot of parents will see out there, is this split of Algebra 1, go to geometry, then go to Algebra 2. But we don't do that.
We do not do that.
Please help me explain why. Okay, because I totally believe in this. I completely believe in this.
My assumption on sort of the reason why people take that break, and I would love to know if people say, no, there's another reason for it. But I hear from a lot of families, right? After Algebra 1, they're tired, right? They're tired of algebra. And so geometry does approach math from a very different perspective. And so it's a nice break, I suppose, if you're arguing for that position, right? To put geometry in between. But it breaks that cumulative nature up.
Absolutely.
Right? And so if you have a child that is even if they're, whether they're struggling or whether they're happy in Algebra 1, just keep going through Algebra 2 and finish it off. And that way you're not having to recover 15 months of a gap.
Right.
When you get back into Algebra 2. And that way they can master it. They can fully master it.
Again, that goes back to what we said about Latin and math. They're cumulative.
They are cumulative.
So why break it up?
Right.
When you said it perfectly.
Now, that's the thing. Can you break it up? We're not saying that you're a sinner because you put geometry before Algebra 2.
That's right.
That's what we do. That's what we suggest. We find our students do well that way. But in the online academy, sometimes for nothing less than a scheduling conflict, we have to swap them, right? Where the kid has to do geometry because they can't do Algebra 2 because it doesn't fit in their schedule.
Sure.
And that can work, right? It's not that it's a huge deal. And I remember talking to Cheryl Lowe about that, and she was like, it's not a huge deal.
It's not a deal breaker.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And anyway, okay. So then we hit into 11th and 12th. And if you're a math nerd, okay, these are great years. This is calculus. This is pre-calculus. This is calculus. But Paul, what do we do? How do we get through these years as parents if you're not that math nerd?
I don't know. I don't know if I'll be kicked off this podcast for saying this, but I mean, the diploma program in the Online Academy, we require 3 credits of math, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. You can graduate after that. That is what most states, that's sort of their bottom requirement, and that's fine. Obviously, we were just talking about it on the Classical Etc. podcast yesterday about science and math, and like, is science and math or is classical education for science, math people, or is it just for language people, right? It was an interesting conversation, but the further you can go in those math skills, the more well-rounded you're going to be. I was thinking about it recently. I could not call to mind anything I ever did in calculus in high school. It's gone. But do I have math skills? Do I have, a facility in lower levels of math? Probably, because I did that. Absolutely. And so if you can get it done, I mean, we teach pre-calculus and calculus in the Online Academy. If you as a parent are a math nerd and you want to teach it at home yourself, great. If you don't, if you said there is no way in our household this is ever going to get done, then I would say that's perfectly fine. Do Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, and you can go into something like statistics if you want to do more math.
There's some options.
Absolutely. There is other options for that.
Consumer math. Sometimes you can find some things in consumer math.
Well, and even, because you continue to practice those math skills, even in the skills of learning personal finance and things like that, right? That's not something that we offer at Memoria Press, but that is something that we would say a family does need to teach their kids.
I think the point is, right? Know what your state requires in graduation requirements. Or the diploma program, such as Memoria Press Online Academy, and go as far as you need to, or as far as your student wants to. Because if they don't want to tackle calculus, then statistics, shift if you need to. Let's say they want to go further. Let's say they are just voracious math people, and my hat's off to them. Yeah. Where do they go? Where do they go if they're still, homeschooling?
I would look at your community college for dual enrollment. That's a phenomenal opportunity. That way you have a teacher who is really good at what they do, and they would end up with college credit for that. And some states, I've talked to parents like in Florida, and they're like, I want my kid, like they were on track to graduate earlier from high school, and they're like, actually, I want my child to be in high school longer because we get free community. Like if it's dual credit, if they're a high schooler taking it at the community college, it's free.
It's free.
And so you need to look at your state. You need to say what's out there, what's available, and to send your child out for 1 or 2 classes in their junior or senior years is a great way to scale them into adulthood and being independent and away from you, rather than it just being you turned 18, you graduated senior year, out you go. So
okay, so after math, we're going to go into science, and we're going to start in this younger, that middle school age again, let's say 7th grade. In 7th grade, we're still in what I would call that guidebook approach. We're doing trees and biology. We're finishing up, like I said, the guidebook approach. But why those two in 7th?
Well, I remember talking about Cheryl teaching me Latin and classical studies. I mean, one of the things I do recall, and I don't know if this was an official class or if this was just something she did because she loved it. But I remember going around the church outside around the church and identifying the trees that were there. She loved those trees. Yes. And they're, with our book of trees, you're getting into photosynthesis. That Tyner biology book is harder than, the medicine book we do in 5th grade, things like that. So, or 6th grade, I think. So you can, we're still on that sort of nature studies path, but it is getting harder, right? They are learning more about those things that they're learning about the world. And why, students, upper school science focuses on quantifying the world, which is a liberal arts impulse, right? We do that. You look at the quadrivium, You look at harmony or music, and you look at astronomy. Both of those are applying discrete and continuous quantity to the natural world. So it's a good thing that we're doing that in high school science, but a seventh grader doesn't have the math to do it.
Right.
So let's keep learning about the world around us and the ways that we can. And actually, one thing that's not in our progression is nature's beautiful order, which is a phenomenal thing. That let's say your kids know your trees because you're just a tree aficionado, and you're like, you know what, I want to go learn something else. Nature's beautiful order is great for setting students up for biology because they get to see the animal kingdom in a way that is reflective of the animals' lives, rather than just let's go dissect a piglet.
Well, and I think that you touched on a lot of the Memoria Press philosophy here in seventh grade and lower, in that we focus on nature studies. We focus on the world that is around them, appreciating that as part of God's creation. And then we hit eighth grade.
We hit physical science.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a step. Actually.
It is.
And I think that physical science course, in many cases could be a full-on high school course, but we tackle it
in eighth grade.
In eighth grade. So we leave that guidebook and we start physical science. And in physical science, we're starting experiments.
We are starting experiments.
And that's what everybody talks about. If you have friends that are at other schools, they've been doing experiments all along. No, we're not doing that because we've given you a little bit of a vision into our Memoria Press philosophy, nature, and the world around us.
Well, hold on.
Okay.
Carrie, I know we're talking about 7th through 12th grade, but let's back up. When you're studying insects, you should have like an insect board where you've pinned them to,
sure.
When you're doing
Doesn't mean we're not hands-on, Paul.
No,
Doesn't mean we're not hands-on.
What is an experiment other than being hands-on, right? So, collect your leaves, collect all that stuff. And what that does, you get into physical science. Yeah, you have some experiments to do. Mm-hmm. I remember some of the dumbest experiences in my classrooms. I do remember other ones that were like, oh, that's really actually interesting. Like when we had a teacher, he was trying to teach us the relativity of heat and cold. And so he would have you put like one hand in an ice bath, and the other hand just not in anything, and leave it in there it was so funny because he would go get salt melt like for your driveway and stuff for the ice, and he would be dumping it in. So he would be pouring ice in, putting salt melt, so it would just get colder and colder and colder.
Can we do that in schools anymore?
No, I don't believe you can.
I don't think we can.
So you leave your hand in there, and you leave it in there for 30 seconds or whatever, and then he'd have like a lukewarm bucket, and you put both of your hands in there, and one hand you'd be like, oh, this feels lukewarm. Right. Another one you feel like this is scalding hot, right? Wow. It was fascinating. So you have some experiments like that are just,
memorable,
fun. Mm-hmm. Like the time he also fed us a poison. That's a whole nother story.
Oh dear.
One of the best teachers I ever had. He was phenomenal. But don't feed your kids poison, please.
Yeah, and I know where you went to school. So,
but you have these experiments, right? And it can be as simple as, you think about the what is it, baking soda and vinegar, volcano sort of thing, to something more complex. But don't be intimidated by those experiments, right? What the curriculum we're using, that, the experiments have intentionally been designed to use mostly household things. And ironically, after 9/11, there was a whole lot of science experiment materials that became prohibited. So everybody kind of had to move that direction anyway to have more sort of common things to be but that's beautiful because science doesn't have to be this far away thing.
It's right here.
But it's we all are living this experience of the natural world. So yeah, let's grab things from our home and let's test them out. Physical science, I did want to say, it kind of is sort of this beginning stage of some biology, some chemistry, some physics. And so you're right. It is hard. It's sort of this...
Because it's a big introduction.
It's a big introduction, but it does set our students up to dive into biology, chemistry, and physics in a serious way because they've already had that introduction in physics.
And that's what you've done. You've named those next 3 steps. And, here at Memoria Press, I think we do some really neat things, particularly in biology, to help our parents through this because I'm not a science person. There's just no way that I could take anything like that on. I would have to outsource this.
Right.
And then I know in biology, we have our wonderful Dr. Rebecca Shelburne.
Yes.
That does a video series.
Yes.
But what are some of the options to get through biology, chemistry, physics? And then, Paul, how far, again, do you really have to go in this? It's kind of like the same conversation with math.
Right. So, first of all, I mean, what we have available to help you, biology, we do have those videos. We do have a study guide. The chemistry program is coming from Navarre. So, they have some helps there. We have not done videos for that yet. So we're still working on chemistry and physics, but we do offer in the online academy, we do offer live courses that have, teachers that are science majors, know way more about science than I do, that are teaching this stuff. I mean, the lady teaching introductory physics for us this year she's been working in a research lab for decades, right? I mean, this is somebody who does science, but she has a gift for teaching, and that's what she wants to do. And she's a phenomenal help to our students. So you do have those things, if you have local co-ops and things of people, parents that are science oriented, that's another way to help you get through these programs. But also don't be intimidated by the length of the books, right? You go get modern biology and it is a college probably level text. We don't do it all. Right. Which we feel bad about, right? Because everything else we do the whole book, right? But there's just these bodies of knowledge they're exactly that. They're a body of knowledge. And so we get as much as we can in a year that we can digest and that we can master.
Well, I've heard the biology book be dropped in my house. And
it's like a gun going off, right?
It's one of those things where mom goes, "Is everybody okay?" And two, you mentioned that we don't cover everything in those, because I will say this to parents out there: our biology book, though very, very good in its organization and how it goes through the material, it is a secular book, and so there's things we don't cover. Right. That are in that book. Right. And we don't do that because, as we will talk about later on, there's a lot that Memoria Press leaves to the family to cover. Right.
But also, the thing to note about that book also is currently we go back to that book in 12th grade if we do anatomy.
Yes.
So if you're on that track of physical science 8th grade, biology 9th grade, chemistry 10th grade, physics 11th grade, then 12th grade you have time for anatomy, right? And so we go back, we use that same book. So,
it's heavy, it's full.
And even as, those 2 years, we still don't cover everything in that book.
No, right.
So.
Okay, so we've rounded out science. We're going to head into modern studies.
I feel like there was something else I wanted to say about science. Oh, no, you asked. You asked, how far do they have to get?
Oh, I did ask that.
So most colleges are going to expect you've done biology, chemistry, and physics. Having said that, right, so if you're doing physical science in 8th grade, then you can do 3 years of high school science and be done if you want to be done. There are a whole lot of, we have anatomy, which is great for them to,
especially if that's a field you're interested in.
That's right.
Right.
But to know your own body, it's kind of important. So, I wish I knew like muscles and how muscles work better, right? Because when you've got a crick in your neck, like if you know your anatomy better,
or for you on your farm chasing pigs.
Oh my gosh, yes. So, get through biology, chemistry, and physics. The one thing with physics is there is vector-based physics, heavy math-based physics, and there's conceptual physics. And so if you are not a math-inclined person, you can still do physics and get those concepts without having to dig into the calculus
side of that
type of questions. Yeah.
And that would be me. Okay. Not it. Okay. So now we'll move into modern studies. And in 7th grade, we get into American history in a very unique, what I think is a unique way. We've introduced American history through our enrichment. We've read good stories, to our children. But in 7th grade, we do this 200 questions about American. Why do we do it that way?
That 7th grade year is meant to just sort of get them information about American history. So we are not concerned about having deeper questions at a. We're doing that in classical studies. We're doing that in literature. Like we're teaching the students how to think, at a 7th grade level. But in our modern studies program, at that point, it's yeah, we know you know bits and pieces of American history. Let's just go through the whole thing and let's pull out the most salient things we need to know.
Right.
But we do that also in story form, right? And what I mean by that is, it's 200 questions. Yes, we ask them to memorize those 200 things or memorize the list of presidents, those sorts of things. But we don't want it just purely to be history is names and dates and places, right? And so we do we tell the story. That's why we have the Gerber history book. That's why we have the Story of the World, Volume 4 that we use for the later half, right? So that they learn the story, but then, okay, now let's pull that main point out. Let's memorize that. So we know Columbus arrived in 1492. We know that, World War II started in 1939, like those sorts of things. And so then that way, when we hit high school American history, we already have that framework, to deal with when we're trying to struggle with the morality of a choice or the cause or consequence of a choice.
Those deeper discussions can take place around that framework.
That's right.
So then 8th grade, we finished out our formal study of geography.
Yes.
In 8th grade. And I think that's, for me, really important as a parent in the way that we do geography in Memoria Press. Again, it's kind of that guidebook, but you are memorizing. And so any comments on geography and finishing that out?
Well, I would just make a distinction between if you're familiar with the Geography 1 and 2 program, Geography 3 is a very different program because it is dealing with some, salient historical facts, with cultures, with religions, with populations, demographics, things like that. That Geography 1 and 2 is purely mapping.
It is.
Right. So Geography 3, we're going to try to be finishing up the mapping and try to contextualize the mapping that they know in a whole world sort of context.
Again, we're drawing back on information already learned.
That's right. But it is a more broad sort of program to get them, so then that way when they're hitting European history, they're able to contextualize that with what's going on in the East, not that they know detail what's going on in the East, but they at least know of the East. They know the important cultural details there, that sort of thing. And so that just is going to help their history studies in high school.
Because that's what's coming. Then we're going to move on to, we do medieval, we do then Europe in the modern world, we do the history of the American Republic. Now, that's the order that we recommended in. That's, if you go to our catalog, you go to our website.
Well, we have Renaissance and Reformation in there somewhere too.
That's in there, excuse me. And so why that order? And can you rearrange that order? Yeah.
So the order, we recently in the past few years, rearranged that order that we were doing it at Highlands. And that was for the intent of getting some sort of chronological progression. Yes, we do modern European history before we do American history, but that's because modern European starts, they both start around the same time, but also, American history, it's important that we get to the more recent stuff when we're studying American history because it's our own history, right? And so just sort of in that chronological progression, we're doing that. There are the reasons also for putting like modern European history and American history towards the end is if you're striving for to take the AP exam, there are more politically correct things that are coming into those exams that we don't want our younger students to have to deal with.
That's right.
So, you can, which is one reason why in the Online Academy, we're moving towards dual credit instead of AP.
All right.
We still offer AP currently, but that is something we're trying to give ourselves the flexibility to teach our students what we want to teach, right? And that's the beauty of homeschooling. It's the beauty of private education, right? You can, if you don't, decide you're going to be in lockstep with this other publisher or company or whatever, you can be that way. And so that's what we're trying to do.
And that's what AP kind of, especially in the American history courses or the European history courses, I feel like that's what AP does in those courses. It really kind of locks you into, this is what we say.
That's right.
You should know.
These are the most important facts of this history period.
And you absolutely do get into some of that political correctness. So Paul, thank you. I'm going to say thank you officially to Paul for moving us in that direction into dual credit, because you've already talked about the benefit of that happening in the junior and senior year when you can take advantage of it. And often cases in certain states, it's free.
Right.
And it is that also that transition for that 11th and 12th grade student. They've gotten a little bit of taste of what's next.
That's right.
If their pathway is truly college.
Right. And so, there's a distinction. And when you get into dual credit, now I'm going off the rails here. There's a distinction in dual credit between dual credit that say a high school offers and dual credit that a college offers, right? And so some colleges will say, yeah, we will authorize this high school to offer this dual credit, but we have to go put our professor in that classroom. And then there's dual credit that like a homeschooler can do where they go send their kid to the college classroom.
Right.
And then there's what we're doing and where we're moving towards is where the online academy, it is our teacher teaching what we want to teach that a college has authorized to do.
Right.
And so, in that case, it wouldn't be free, because it's that college that is providing that service to us, right? If that makes sense. But that way you get a master educator that is classically minded, that is, that is teaching what we want taught in the way we want it taught and getting college credit for it. That's a perfect place to pause.
Well, hold on. What did we not cover?
Well, you asked if you can reorder the subjects. I didn't feel the time periods. You absolutely can if you're not locked into AP, right? You can do American history in 9th grade. That is something that, a 9th grader can handle. But I would say modern European history is more difficult. I would leave that for 11th or 12th grade. But chronologically, that's why we're doing it chronologically at that point. So take your pick.
And that's from Paul. All right, Paul, this is going to round out our part one. And in the interest of time, we're going to pause and we will pick up on part two on 4 other subjects. And that's going to be literature, our classical and Christian studies, our composition, and logic. And I love ending with logic, but we'll get there. So, Paul, thank you for today. Thank you for this episode.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. If you liked our episode, click the thumbs up button below or leave a comment to let us know what you thought. It always helps us to know if we've helped you. You can also click the bell icon and subscribe to the show so that you can stay in touch. Then I'd love for you to share it with a friend. We have many resources here on this channel, so I hope you'll check those out too. I'm Carrie McGraw. Thanks for listening today, and I'll see you next time.